success strategy number 14, new success strategy, practice your values and seek feedback. That's where we're headed. Practice your values and seek feedback. Now, the reason for this strategy is to shift your decision-making from focusing on the circumstances of life and trying to produce results in the domain of circumstances, and to shift your decision-making from focusing on your actions and the results to focusing on your way of being, your values. Because a lot of us, we put our attention not on what's most important to us, our values, but on what's not as important, which is the world of the material. So really the purpose of this is to improve that which is most important to you, because practice doesn't make perfect, but practice does make improvement. So practice, I looked it up, it says to repeat something to get better. That's what practice is. To repeat something to get better. That's what I'm recommending that you do. Now, in our culture, most of us spend a lot of time practicing skills that aren't really that important to us. Well, I mean, we're sort of important, like we practice golf. A lot of people practice golf all the time. Or they practice the piano, or they practice tennis, or actually, for a minute, think about what do you spend time practicing? In other words, repeating so you get better. What do you spend time practicing? For me, I practice public speaking. I practice teaching. I practice coaching. I practice operating my computer because I'm just kind of a computer nut. I like to get better and better. I practice typing. I practice spelling. But write down something that you practice. What do you spend time on so that you improve? Write it down, and then, matter of fact, give me a couple examples. Just raise your hand real quickly, just one. Give me one or two things that you discovered as you're sitting here thinking that you practice, you spend time on so that you improve. Some of you, maybe it's dancing. For some people, it's singing. I know people that practice singing. Of course, doctors practice healing people. Adam, what do you practice?
Sure, Dave. I practice ultimate frisbee, and I practice driving Maestro conference calls.
Yeah, so you practice doing what you're doing right now, and then something, of course, much more important, ultimate frisbee. Yeah. Okay, a couple more examples. What do you practice? What do you spend time doing so that you improve? Some people practice writing. Barbara Benton, go ahead. What do you practice?
I practice exercising, and I practice smiling.
There we go. Exercising and smiling. So both of those are actions. Matter of fact, most of what we practice are actions. So now what I'm recommending you practice is being, or your values. That's the idea here. And I've got 5 steps to this strategy. I'm going to present them very quickly, and you can write them down. Alejandro's going to write them down up on the screen, and then you can look to see what do you want to practice. I'm going to do a little exercise after I speak these to ask specifically what do you want to practice and how are you going to practice it. But here's the 5 steps to practicing your values and seeking feedback. Number 1, clarify your values. List, define, and clarify your values. That's the first step because, of course, it's hard to practice that which is unclear. That's why golf is easy. Gosh, everybody knows we've clarified what golf is. Now, I use this analogy a lot. I've only played a few games of golf in my life, but I just notice how people who practice it are really dedicated because they know what it is. So if you want to practice your values, list them, What are yours? And then clarify them. Okay, number 2 is commit to the practice. Really say, I am going to do this. I'm not going to just talk about it. I'm going to walk my talk. I'm going to practice what I preach. So you commit to the practice. And it's not that you're going to practice all your values all the time. I actually recommend that you pick maybe one a week or one a month so that you focus on one of them. But whatever it is, you commit to the practice. You commit to it by writing yourself a note. You commit to it by telling others that you're going to do it. So in other words, you commit to it privately, but you also commit to it publicly. A public promise. Tell people, yeah, I'm going to practice this. And then, third is you ask for feedback. And you really have to be pretty specific when you ask for feedback, because in our culture, people are trained not to give you feedback. Most of your friends are trained not to give you feedback. We say it's not polite. Besides, we know we'll kind of get in trouble. We've sort of got an unwritten rule. The unwritten rule in our culture is I won't give you feedback if you don't give me feedback, especially if it's not very flattering feedback. In other words, I won't be honest with you about what I see that's off in your behavior if you don't be honest with me about what's off in my behavior. If you want that feedback, ask for it. Ask for it repeatedly. Ask for it with sincerity. Ask the people around you. You can ask your family. You can ask your friends. You can ask your coworkers. You can ask all of them. You can ask people in your church. You can ask people in your in workshops. If you give whatever you do, ask people, and then you can even give them specifics about how you want it. You can ask them for a score or a grade. Maybe you can ask them for a sentence that describes how you're doing. Students get grades, and athletes often get scores from judges. That's where you're really asking people to be a judge, to give you their mirroring. You even ask them for a paragraph. That's what coaches, like athletic coaches, often after the game, they'll sit down and they'll give the players a paragraph or two. They'll even watch a videotape of the game and say, "Oh, here's where you did this. This was great, and this wasn't so good." Now, videotape, by the way, is another way you can get feedback. You can ask your friends to videotape you, or you can videotape yourself and then have your friends watch it, or videotape yourself and watch it yourself. Of course, I've done this a lot because I videotape myself teaching, and then I post it, and I get feedback, and I get feedback from you. And some of the feedback I've gotten, by the way, is not very flattering, but it's great. It really is great. It doesn't always feel great, but it's great to know how I come across. I worked with a man for years. His name was Wayne, and he used to videotape himself at work. And then he would sit down and watch himself work, because that was a way that he got feedback. He'd also show those videotapes to his coworkers and say, "Hey, here's a picture of me working. What could I do differently?" You could audio tape yourself. Now, if you're asking for this feedback, I recommend that you be very detailed and specific. Don't just say something like, "Hey, please give me feedback about my values." Instead, say, "Hey, I want to become more generous. So I'd like some specific feedback from you about how I've been generous. How am I doing compared to last year? Do you notice a difference? And what do you notice? Do I appear more generous, less generous, about the same? And specifically, what do you see that demonstrates my generosity?" Of course, the word generous there, you could replace it with any of your values. Or you could say something like, "Hey, I really want to be lighter. I want to be less attached. I want to be just more enjoyable to be around, and I'm practicing. So I'd like your feedback about that. Have you seen me getting plugged in lately, agitated, or have I been pretty light and joyful? All right, that's step number 3. Ask for it, ask for it. Specifically, step number 4 is then document that feedback. Put it in writing. Maybe maybe they gave it to you in writing, in which case great, but if they didn't, put it in writing yourself. All people that measure and get feedback, like in sports, I've just never heard of a man or a woman playing around a golf without writing down their score. I'm sure it happens, but very seldom. Golfers keep score. Bowlers keep score. Olympic divers or Olympic sports people get a written score. Students in school. I used to give assignments and when I was a college professor, and if I didn't return a grade, people didn't like it. So what I'm recommending is you document it in writing. And the last step in this 5-step program is to celebrate your progress while recommitting to the practice. So every time you notice you got a little better in one of your values, you celebrate. All right, when do you practice? Well, I'm suggesting you practice when life's particularly hard, because in hard times it's even more important that you follow your values. So tell people, hey, I'm really having a hard time now. I'd really like your feedback. But I also recommend you practice when life is easy, when it's really easy, because our tendency is to leave well enough alone. But I think when life's really easy, it's a good time to practice. Of course, I also think it's a good time to practice when life's not easy and it's not hard. In other words, I'm recommending you practice all the time. So here we go. Here's the exercise, and then I'm going to have you write a discovery and intention about your life and share it in your groups again. So here's the exercise. What I'd like you to do is write down a few values that are important to you. This is really step 1. Now, I'm going to put up on the screen a whole bunch of values. These are from pages 32 and 33 in the Falling Awake book. And up on the screen here, we're going to list these values from pages 32 and 33 in the Falling Awake book. And you can look through this list of values and see, pick 1 or 2 that you'd really like to practice, that you'd really like to move yourself forward on. These are values like creativity and candor, which is write down a value that's really important to you. Do that now. And now write down your commitment to practice it if you have one. And your commitment might only be to practice it for a short amount of time, or it might be to practice it for longer. So now you've got your commitment, write down how long you will practice it. Now, and then write down, in addition to how long you're going to practice that commitment, write down who might help you practice that. Might help you practice that commitment. The exercise. Now let's take one more. I have you write down what you're learning about yourself here and then sharing it with your groups. So write down what it is that you want to practice, what value.